The Still Loading podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people on Patreon. Amazing people like Ryan K., Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Gilmer, Matt aka Stormageddon, Stephen P., and Mr. Biscuits have all been wonderful enough to support the show over there. So if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode, along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out everything it has to offer. On this episode of Still Loading, the book may be called Hurt Me Plenty, but I'm still too young to die. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today's episode, it is a look into the history of first-person shooters, though not the entire history. I mean, it's a pretty big genre. There's a lot to talk about, but we are specifically focusing on the years of 2003 to 2010, and more specifically, we are talking about a book that was written about those years in the genre. And joining me today, author of this book, Stuart Maine. Stuart, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for setting aside some time for this. I've genuinely been looking forward to this. I love what Bitmap Books does in general. And also, I guess, full disclaimer for the listeners, I did get a review copy of this, but that still would not change my opinion of it, that it is a really great deep dive onto the history of first-person shooters. And this is the second book in a series. Isn't that right, Stuart?
Yeah, so we did I'm Too Young to Die, which was... it covered basically from the very beginning, which is a debatable point up until 2002. Yeah. And then this one picks up 2003 to 2010.
I can understand that that sentiment of it's a debatable point to start. I'm assuming because you did, it was what, 92 to 2003, was that what it was? Or no,
yeah,
90. Shoot, what was it? What were the years?
We kicked off because, we kind of looked at the genre as kicking off when Wolfenstein and Ultimate Underworld came out, but we wanted to make sure that that they didn't just appear from nowhere, that there were a whole bunch of games before them, and so we kind of cover the precursors, all the sort of genres that led up to those games, basically.
I can relate to the struggle of trying to pick a starting point, not in nearly as a professional sense, but years ago, I did a series on the history of RTS games. Wow. And you could make the argument the RTS genre didn't start until Dune 2, like the RTS genre as we know it now, I should say. But there's obviously so many inspirations and things that go. I think the first game I ended up talking about was something back in 1979 for the Odyssey 2.
Wow.
I want to say Magnavox Odyssey 2. So I can understand you're like, well, we're kind of guessing where this is started, because Wolfenstein may be the first popular one, super popular one, but there's obviously influences and other ones well before that. So I can empathize with the struggle of trying to figure out a good starting point for that. But we're here to talk about, though, the years 2003 to 2010. What I thought it was funny, you brought it up in the book. While it is a lower number of years compared to your first book, which you covered about a little over a decade, the amount of games coming out between 2003 and 2010 in the FPS genre is just staggering.
Yeah, it was. I didn't actually realize what we were getting into, because with the first book, we said, okay, we don't need to cover all of them. We just need to cover the vast majority. There were a lot of Doom clones, even though that was what people called the whole genre back then. They were literal Doom clones. And so we kind of left a bunch of them out. Maybe there was about, 30 to 50 games more that we could have covered. But this one, there's over 200 games in this book, and we could have added another 100 easily. More than that, probably. That was one of the interesting things between the two. In the first book's era, it was hard to make a first-person shooter. The technology didn't exist. You had to develop it. but by the second one, it was actually relatively easy. Anybody could buy or make this technology, and that just opened the floodgates, basically.
I remember so I was in college in like 2008 or 9, and I remember that was one of the easiest things for. I took game design. I'm not a game designer. I don't think I have the temperament to be one, but I remember going to school for it, and I remember like first person shooters were just one of the easiest things. There's templates built into game engines where it's like, here's a first person, like it wouldn't have projectiles for you, but it would give you the very basics of like, here, you can make this 3D landscape, and we already have the first person camera programmed for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and third person as well. There is another thing to worry about. I've got to control the character. I've got to control the camera. So first person is just the natural one that you default to. Yeah, makes sense.
So before we dive further into this, I have a bunch of questions about your book that I want to ask you. But before we dive any further into this, for my listeners to get to know you a little bit more, um, just kind of talk a little bit about your history with gaming and video games and some of your earliest gaming memories. Like, what got you into video games?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty old. What are they old? So my
Young at heart. Don't kid yourself. You're
yeah,
fine.
yeah, no, I mean, yeah. If you could see the Transformers on the shelf behind me, yeah. My
That's
like
what I like to
physically
hear.
old, mentally stopped at 12. But yeah, I mean, our family's first console was the Fairchild Channel F of all things, which was this bizarre machine. But it wasn't until we got our Amstrad that I started to go, okay, hang on, there is something here. Like, started to fall in love with these strange worlds that you know. Like, it always felt like there was more behind the screen than I could see, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then yeah, it was just basically all the consoles, and then eventually a PC. Like the first PC game I bought was Dark Forces, so it was that kind of era.
hmm
And yeah, basically just bought them all until and just kept. Because at that point you could play a lot of what was out. Whereas nowadays, of course, you have to pick. It's a lot harder. But yeah, so just and then of course board games and role playing games and war games as well. Just games basically.
hmm hmm Man, I can really relate to the Star Wars Dark Forces thing. I feel like that seems to be a touch point. So one of the I don't now I'm blanking the first interview in your book. Hold on, I forget their names. It was the people who run Night Dive Studios.
Yes.
I believe it was Steven who also said that he played Dark Forces. That was like one of his first games too, if I'm remembering
Yeah.
correctly.
Well, he did this funny thing about when they got their PC, he tried to sneak Doom,
Yeah,
but his
yeah.
mum spotted it and was like, "You're not having that." And so Dark Forces was the compromise, basically. Yeah, and it's funny because I bought Doom 2 after Dark Forces, and because I came through Dark Forces, Doom 2 kind of it was amazing, but it was kind of you could already see it was older. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
Dark Forces just did something magical about the world, and it was very creepy. It was good.
I still remember in Dark Forces. So I had a Mac growing up. I didn't have a PC, but we had like a demo of Dark Forces. We didn't have the full game. We had like a demo disc of it, right? And I think we had like a bunch of other games too. I remember my parents bought like a Star Wars game sampler type of thing. I don't know if it was a sampler is the right term for it, but they had like Rebel Assault 1 and 2. You had X Wing. Um, Rebel Assault, excuse me, I remember being outrageously difficult with the controls. I'd be curious to see how I would handle it now. Funnily enough, I do have another copy of Rebel Assault, but for the Sega CD, and it does not handle well.
Yeah,
But in any case, the reason I bring up all that is like with Dark Souls, I remember that first level, I was really kind of like enamored with all the secrets in it.
yeah, and it just felt very Star Wars. Like for the time, you couldn't, you had the films, but this and some books or whatever. But this was, oh my god, I'm actually walking around, and there's the Death Star plans, and like you say, yeah, it just tucked away little things. Yeah, it was remarkable, basically.
I mean, I actually bought it on Steam a couple years ago. Not the Night Dive remaster. It was before the Night Dive remaster came out. But I need to get the Night Dive remaster.
Yeah,
Have you?
the
I'm assuming you've
remaster.
played it.
Yeah, it's very good actually. Yeah. We put some screenshots of it in the second book just to compare the two. But yeah, if you play some of the older games, they some of the things that you just took for granted kind of are a bit spiky now. Whereas that's what Night Dive are good at, is just taking those edges off, and you don't even realize they've done it. You just remember it. That's how it used to play. You know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna have to like look into that. I think that's like such a interesting way to approach developing a game too, where it's like you're developing it for, excuse me, for how people remember it, not for exactly how it was.
Yeah.
Um, because part of me, like the part of me is like, no, you got to keep it exactly 1-to-1, but then at the same time, you don't remember a lot of the stuff that is all the rough around the edges things that were commonplace to you back when you were a kid are not going to feel commonplace anymore.
Yeah, things have moved on basically, and but yeah, I say they were really interesting to talk to because they did have this whole philosophy of like we can change this, but we can't change that, and a lot of it is just people think this is what it used to be like, but actually it wasn't, and your memory forgets these things.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually looking at pictures of. I'm actually looking at the Steam page for their Reforce or for their Dark Forces remaster. Now it looks great. Like the remastered cutscenes look phenomenal. I'm really curious, like because I'm trying to see. Like I don't. They don't have any like. Oh wait, no. There's the gameplay. I was trying to see what they did to the gameplay. It looks great.
Yeah, yeah. So it's fundamentally the same game. It doesn't, but just as I say, just some of the things that are a bit weird, or the modern PCs struggle with, or we're not used to anymore with our controls and stuff like that. But yeah, and things like the System Shock remake they did is astonishingly good. It's amazing. The first System Shock was quite clunky, but what they've done is great.
I will have to get their System Shock remake because I've never played System Shock 1 or 2. I love the BioShock games. I've played Infinite, though I haven't played the second one. I played the original and Infinite, and I do want to play Ken Levine's new game coming out, which I
Mm-hmm.
forget what it's called.
Judas.
Judas, thank you. Because I mean, I'm always down for more BioShock, but in any case, so now that we know a little bit more about how you kind of first got into games, how did you first get into game development? So something that I a lot of times when I interview authors, a lot of them don't necessarily have a history in game development, or if they do, it's kind of like I'm not trying to say this to it's going to sound like derogatory. I don't mean it that way, but it's a little bit lighter compared to others. You've had a career in game development for at least over 2 decades, two and a
Yeah,
half decades. So how did you first get into developing games?
yeah. I mean, back in those dim and dark past, there were no courses or anything like that. So it never even occurred to me that I could make games. It wasn't like I said, "Oh, I can't do that." I just literally never thought about it. And I was working for a cyber cafe, teaching people how to use the internet because it was that new at the time.
Oh man, that is like really
Yeah, yeah,
it's I mean, I would have been too young for that, but I still remember like, here in the US just thinking, it's like explaining to a kid now what dial up was, right? Like and
yeah.
having to or like if you watch any movie from the 90s, they always have to have like a 5-minute exposition on like what is the internet because it was so new.
Yeah, yeah, and lots of people typing. Yeah, we don't type, but yeah. Anyway, so anyway, I was doing that, and then I just happened to look. There's a web developer called Bullfrog who did, Theme
Okay,
Hospital,
yeah,
Dungeon
yeah.
Keeper, and I looked at their website. And it just said, if you want, anybody can come and be a QA person for a couple of
Wasn't that
weeks.
Peter Molyneux's company?
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
and so they didn't pay you. I took 2 weeks holiday, and I went to their office and I tested Theme Hospital and Dungeon Keeper, and
Wow.
I was like, oh, okay, I want to do this for a living. Basically, this is amazing. Seeing their office, seeing the people, the games they were playing, and just like, okay, hang on, this is yeah. But I had no experience, so all I did was made a bunch of Quake levels. So Quake will always have a special place for me because
Mhm.
I used those to get my first job. I sent them to a company called Signosis, and yeah, basically that was my portfolio.
That's why, and that's something that you, not to bring it back to literally the first interview in the book, but with the guys from Night Dive, that seems to be a like you, them, and it seems to be a lot of other people. It seems to be like whether it was Doom level editing or Quake level editing or not, that seems to be a real big endpoint for a lot of who were perspective back in the '90s, but like developers from the '90s who to get into the industry.
Yeah, I mean these days it's. never been easier to make a game. Basically, there are like Unity and Unreal are free.
Hmm.
Unless you're going to make more than 1 million, you don't have to pay for them. And so you can just go, I'm going to make a game, go. Whereas then you couldn't do that, and so making a level was the entry point, basically.
Yeah, that's just, but that's cool. But I think it just goes to show how important like community tools are for games. You don't realize how much more that benefits
Hmm.
the industry just as much as it does the fan base. Because obviously, I mean, look at almost every Bethesda game, right? There's a legion of passionate fans who will mod the hell out of those games, mainly because they're a lot of times they're broken when they ship. But
Yeah,
that's besides the point.
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, when I've done a lot of obviously hiring over that time, and we always say if you want to stand out, you've got to make something. Basically, there's so many people now trying to get into games that just build anything you want and demonstrate that you can do it. And so, yeah, it's super important for sure.
If you were like, that actually leads me to a question that I didn't have written down, but it just popped into my head. So one of the reasons I took game design in college because I loved video games, still do. But one of the reasons that I kind of dropped out of it is I just didn't feel like there was any real entry point for me into the industry because I was better at coming up with ideas per se and not necessarily the art side or the um, programming side. And I'm not saying like my ideas were good or anything like that. It's just more like that's something I felt like I was stronger at. And I'm like, well,
Mhm.
no one's going to hire you to be like a designer if you can't program. Like how can you even get a start? So like, would you recommend to anyone now just like would I guess the point I'm trying to make, I think you kind of already answered it, but I guess to reinforce it is just make something, anything, just to show that like it doesn't matter how good your ideas are. If you can't show that you can build it, then it's not going to make a difference, I guess.
Yeah, so I don't want to get into this too far because we're talking about first person shooters, but
No, we'll get in. I
um,
promise I'll guide it back.
yeah, no, that's fine. But I took some time off like a couple of years ago to do some more writing, and so as well as writing about first person shooters, I wrote another book called Designing Video Games, which is out end of June, and it tells you exactly what you're looking to know. It's like this: if you're looking to get into games, it's my that I've learned all these painful lessons so you don't have to sort of book. And it basically says, yeah, exactly that. You need to demonstrate that you can do something, and more than that, I want to know that you can think about it. So even if you make terrible games, that's fine as long as you can say, "I learned this," and you know what I mean. It's that
Yeah.
kind of I can think about what I'm doing and I can articulate it. So I can't program and I can't draw, or I can sketch. Um, and so as a designer, if you can't do those things, you're looking for bigger studios. Like if you're going to work for a tiny indie, you need to be very T-shaped. You need to be able to do
Yes.
everything. Whereas if you go to a big studio, they don't want T-shaped people; they want specialists. So there is
Makes
an entry
sense.
point, even if you can't program, for sure.
Good to know. Good to know. All right, I will guide us back to the book because that's the whole point of this is to talk about your book, Hurt Me Plenty: History of First Person Shooters, from 2003 to 2010. But my first question about the book itself, I guess, and kind of in relation also to your first book on the, like, kind of your first book in this like little series here. Why first person shooters? Like you could have written about any genre, any series. Like what specifically about first person shooters drew you to them for the topic of this book series?
Yeah, good question. But so, I mean, I was in lockdown, like everybody else, and it kind of, in a way, didn't matter so much for me because I could work from home, which we learned very quickly.
Mm,
But I thought, okay, I want to do something new. I want a new hobby or whatever. So I saw Bitmap's stuff, which was amazing, and I thought, well, if I'm going to approach them blind, I need, and it turned out it was true. The first question is, who the hell are you? Can you actually write this book, basically? And so I
hmm.
picked my favorite genre because I thought, and obviously I'm going to have to do an incredible amount of research, but at least I will be able to recognize if the research I'm doing is true. If you see what I mean.
Hmm.
If I was approaching something I had no idea about, it's much harder because you read stuff and then you go, okay, sure, and you have to then go and find out if you can back that up. Whereas with first-person shooters, I thought I played them all at the time. Turned out that was nowhere near true. But yeah, it gave me my entry point because as I say, I tried to play all the first-person shooters at that point. They were my genre.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay. Uh, One of the things, to kind of bring in our previous topic of your history in game development back to this, in what ways did you working in game development for the last 2 decades, help you with writing this book?
Um, uh, well, so I think in quite a few ways. Like, I try really hard with these to make it to kind of articulate some of the things that the developers are probably having to do or having to think about instead of going, "Oh, this game sucks. This is the worst game ever." It's like, actually, hang on a minute. Like as a developer, you never set out to make a game that sucks, obviously.
Yeah.
And so I thought maybe I can go, there's probably a reason for this, and this might be it. Or in the context of the industry at this particular point in time, this is why this game is like this. Stuff that, like you said earlier, if you haven't worked in games, you can't necessarily provide that because you just, it wouldn't occur to you. I could find people that I'd work with, or because nearly 3 decades now, I know you make a lot of contacts, so I could. So, for example, Shell Shock 2, which is one of the games the industry, the gamers like to say is the worst game ever made, and all this, I worked with a guy who made that game, and so I could literally go to him and say what happened, basically.
Hmm.
Um,
Did you
so
find
yeah,
out what happened?
yeah, it's actually tucked away in the book in that the the developer brought the company that was making it, changed it a lot, and then the people left and new people came and they kept changing it, and in the end
Hmm.
nobody wanted the game, but there was a financial penalty if they didn't release it, so they had to get it out even though everybody was sick of it. And
That's
so
wild.
it was one of these things of, yeah, this game is going to come out no matter what, basically.
Man,
um,
that's the type of stuff I actually brought it up in. I don't know when this episode I'm going to be having. It's going to be actually having a pretty quick turnaround time because I want to release it as close as possible to the release of your book. Um, but I spoke with another author on a different episode about game preservation and contextual preservation, and that right there is like that context is hugely important because otherwise, if all you see is oh, this game bad, then you're missing like over like 90% of the story.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's what, again, none of the developers would ever say, I'm going to make a bad game. Like, what's the point? Life's too short. So
Hmm.
something went wrong, or we talk about the definition of success. And sometimes, so for example, one of the book, I can't remember, it's called Hacks or something. We covered it in the first book, which it wasn't an amazing game, but almost all the developers of that game went on to work at like Valve or other big companies. It was their demo basically, and so their definition of success was done. Even though you might look at it and go, "It didn't sell very well" or whatever, that's not important to those people. So all the games that we cover, there's very few where I've gone, this is just objectively terrible. There's always something there, some reason that this game exists or turned out like it did. Yeah.
That really gets me thinking if I wonder if there's ever been like a producers esque game where someone made a game bad on purpose because it would be more financially viable, a la Mel Brooks and I was
Yeah.
about to say Gene Wilder, Gene
Yes,
Hackman.
that would have been a very different game.
That'd be a wild,
Um,
that'd be a wild change to that movie. Um, no, now in conversely, was there anything that with your experience in game development that did not help you with writing the book or made it harder to write the book?
interesting. I mean, they're big. Like you said when we were chatting just before this, they are big, heavy books. They've got over 100,000 words in them. But I still had to leave a lot out, and because I was going, "Oh, this is fascinating," but then you go, "Yeah, but is it fascinating to the audience, or is it just fascinating to me as a developer, sort of thing?" So there was a little bit of that of, okay, hang on, just tone
Hmm.
it down a bit, or cut that bit out, or whatever.
That is, I think that's an underrepresented part of like writing about game history stuff. I joke around with for my podcast where it's like, I'm a gaming grab bag podcast with a little like with a little bit of game history flavor because I like if I had enough to say about it, I would love to dive into the ins and outs of like Nintendo's memory mapper chips, right? Like all the different that type of stuff, like how they work fascinates me. That's not going to interest a lot of people. And I'm not a developer. I don't even understand necessarily the ins and outs, but to like do a full bit of episode on it, like you have to really freaking like Nintendo, like NES Nintendo to
Yeah,
want to learn about the memory mapper chips, even though they'll have no bearing on your life, right?
yeah.
Uh,
Although I would
so,
say if YouTube has got you covered,
oh
basically,
yes, they
um,
they have it there
then
for sure.
yeah, well, it's just that the number of times you go, I've never heard of this game, and I dug it out of some obscure list. Then you go on YouTube, and there are people playing it, and you're like, "What the hell? This is amazing!" So yeah, I do. From a commercial point of view, you can't. It's not going to cut it, but from a super nerd point of view, it's amazing that everything is covered in that detail.
Hmm. I guess it just matters. It depends on how large of an audience do you want to reach, right? Like whether commercial or not. Like I don't like, for example, like I don't make a lot of money off the podcast. I make my patrons are wonderful, and I'm very appreciative of them, and I'm grateful for all of them. But like I'm not doing this necessarily for a commercially viable venture. I just do it for fun.
Hmm.
So I can afford to go into some of those niche things. But if you're trying to sell something, right? Like
Mhm.
you can't necessarily spend like 4 chapters on like unless it's a hyper specific book, unless that's the point of it. So I don't know.
Hmm.
I'm losing the thread of the point I'm trying to, because every time I say something like you can't do that, and then I'm like, well, you know what? Nathan Altice did write I Am Error, which is a very hyper technical look at the NES. So maybe I'm wrong with all this. Anyway, to get bringing back on track because I'm losing the thread a little bit here. Um, Something that was brought up, and I was thinking about this back to my game design days, is designing how FPSs were designed, and it got me thinking a lot. Where something in when I was taking game design, one of the things they talk about is designing for like the 3 foot experience versus the 8 foot experience, right? Whether you're playing on a PC, the 3 foot
Mhm.
experience, or a home console, the 8 foot experience, and how that changes your development. Like what do you do to depending on the in which the atmosphere the person's going to be playing it in? And I
Mhm.
feel like I guess I want to get your opinion on this. Do you feel like FPSs have a very unique relationship with that? Because the reason I ask is I was thinking where other genres, like we brought up RTSs before. Yes, there's RTS games on like consoles, but by and large, it is a PC centric genre,
Mhm.
right? Platformers, there are like you can play platformers on your PC, but generally that is a console centric genre, right? Um, and more so now, like there's a lot more bleed over between third person shooters and platformers now than there used to be. But I feel like FPSs from like the late 90s and all through the mid 2000s, a lot of the stuff you cover in this book, they had to account for both when that wasn't necessarily the norm for everything. Do you feel like FPS games had to, I don't know,
Yeah.
like do you feel like they had to deal with that more?
Yeah, for sure. If we can dive mm, to wander for a second. When I started the first book, I'd never written a book, and so I just started gathering first person shooters and then writing about them. Eventually, by the end of the book, I realized there's a story here, which is like basically the growth of them. But like you say, they're all on PC, and they people are starting to figure out how to do these things, and then they're starting to break the rules. But then by the end of the first book, Halo and Metroid Prime and GoldenEye are coming, and they have broken all the rules, and they're the first console first person shooters that were different to the PC ones. People were trying to replicate the PC on the console, but these guys were like, no, we're not going to do that.
Hmm.
And then suddenly, by the time of this second book, those rules are now the norm, like Halo's 2 weapons and recharging shields and being able to mouse look and all these things that um, they became the rules. And then so the story, it turned out from the second book kind of straight away, was this idea of um, the hugely expensive Call of Duties and Battlefields and stuff is one track, and then on the other track are these really weird indie games that have got no money, but they're doing strange little experiments. And so for all that, what was interesting to watch was all these PC games being converted to consoles and then doing their best. But then by the end, or basically by the start of the second book, it's the other way around, and the console is the lead platform now, and people are making console first choices and then converting
Mm-hmm.
them to the PC, because the numbers of sales are just huge on the console compared to the PC. So that whole shift kind of just gently happened where they stopped trying to replicate and started leading, and then the PC had to catch up.
Mm.
So yeah, it was interesting.
From a game design standpoint, do you like what's a big like with FPSs? We'll stick to FPSs specifically. What's like a big I should say a big. What's like a design choice difference that you usually typically would see for the between the 3 foot experience and like the 8 foot experience, right? Like home console where you're sitting away from the TV and PC where you're sitting right up against the monitor. Like what's something that you would see from a design choice that you would have to make depending on which system your platform you're playing on?
Yeah, well, for sure. Like on a practical level, you would have to help players, ideally invisibly, on console because you've got just such a big distance between you, and you've got this little analog stick, and you're trying to shoot somebody in the head. Whereas on PC, you just put the mouse on them and shoot them.
Yeah.
So they had to develop, like, if you look at again Halo, it has spectacularly complicated things where it slows you down as you approach a head, and then it speeds you back up if you pass it, and stuff like this. So there's these sort of invisible things trying to help you, but also like so things like Condemned or Fear, which are in this second, they're great games, but they're very PC games because you're like you say, 3 foot from your monitor. They're very dark, but that's okay because I'm like in a lean-in experience. I will have my lights off. I will be immersed. Whereas if I'm playing in my front room and I'm sat on a sofa and I'm playing a dark game, I just can't see it. I'm just going to turn the
Mm,
brightness up. Basically, it's different. The kind of it's harder, I think, to get sucked into that. I'm in this world and I've forgotten that I'm in a real place, sort of thing that you can do very easily on a PC, basically.
makes sense. Makes sense. I was just curious because like I remember learning about that in game design. I'm like, oh, that I never really thought about how the distance would affect, but like immersion is obviously a big thing. Now, with first person shooters, immersion is probably one of its biggest like assets, right? Like it's so much easier to get immersed in an FPS, not only because you are at it from a first person viewpoint, but also like especially when you're playing on PC, like you said, you can really zone in and like hone in. I remember when Modern Warfare 2 came out. I really enjoyed the first one, and I got the second one, and I remember like coming home from work or school or whatever it was, and I closed my bedroom door, turned off all the lights, and I just sat there letting the whole game like envelop me. I don't think I could have had that on like a home console experience.
No, no, for sure. Yeah, mine was Deus Ex, the first one. I did that,
Ooh.
and I didn't even realize it got dark because I was playing it so long. And when I looked up, I got really dizzy because my brain couldn't function for a second. It's like, hang on a minute, that's not reality. And yeah, I don't know. There is just something like, even if you say you are this character, you are Duke Nukem or you are Samus or whatever, it's still you. And when a thing flies at you, you react like it's coming at you, which you lose when it's third person.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When doing research for this book, were there any games that particularly surprised you? Because, like you said, like you said at the top of the episode, you thought you knew every FPS or the vast majority of them, but when you started to dig into it, you found a lot of different ones. Were there any that stuck out to you that were like, "Oh wow, I never heard of this," and this was either pleasantly surprising or pleasantly interesting? Maybe it wasn't very good, but it was just interesting.
Yeah. So from the second one, weirdly, a lot of the kind of indie weird stuff came from the kind of in the first book there were these weird Japanese games. There aren't many in the second book. They're much more weird Russian games or kind of Eastern
Hmm.
European.
Okay.
I think partly because they couldn't license or couldn't afford to license its technology and stuff like that. So they had to make their own, and they just made really strange little games. There's things like You Are Empty, which is this: you wake up and the world has ended, and it's very kind of weird and schlocky, but deeply atmospheric. It's like kind of reminds you of like a low budget Fallout 3.
Okay. Low
Um,
budget Fallout.
yeah, you're kind of creeping around. When you get into combat, it starts to break down a bit, but the world is astonishing. My favorite example is there's a game called Techno the Base. It was made by
Okay.
one guy, I think, somewhere like in Africa, somewhere weird like this, and he made that game, released it, and vanished. And thankfully, the internet saved it, and you can still play it. But nobody's heard of him since, and it never made any money. No, you can't buy it. You can just download this one-person game, and it's an astonishing game. It's like a System Shock sort of level thing. You creep around, and robots attack you, and if you knock off an arm, the arm flaps around trying to kill you still. And the puzzles are really clever. Like you have to look for gaps on the map and go, well, why is there a gap? And there's a room hidden there. And for one person, it's just like this is an amazing example of something that you just nobody's heard of, but is astonishing.
What is it called again? That sounds really interesting.
Techno the Bass.
Techno the Base. I am literally going to write that down in my phone right now because I will probably forget it otherwise.
It's
Techno the Base.
yeah, you can find it, and this is part of what I enjoyed doing with the book is there are fans for almost all of these games, but most people have never heard of them. So if I can potentially help people go, I've never played that. That sounds cool, and kind of expose games to them that they would never have, as I say, never heard of.
I love the visuals. I'm looking at it right now. That's really impressive that one person made this.
Yeah, and it's not a good technology either. They used some really poor engine that you would never think to use, and you have to type commands in. You have to. It's astonishing, basically.
Interesting. I love stuff like that. I love because like I think something that gets lost a little bit in like the modern AAA hype cycle and everything like that is that there, and even with indies now, I love indie games, don't get me wrong, but even there's a hype cycle for indies now too.
Mm-hmm.
um and I feel like there's just so many interesting things that like little footnotes that may, who knows, like how many people have played it or whatnot, but like you miss out on stuff like that, and I think that's really cool that you dug in and checked out some like things that like I've never heard of that and whatnot.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I was telling you off mic. I didn't get to finish reading the book yet. I read a good chunk of it though, and I'm going to continue reading this even after the interview. Sometimes like I'll read up until like I do the interview, and then I'm like, all right, I got the vibe of the book. This was a fun interview, a fun conversation. I legitimately have been enjoying the hell out of your book with what I've read of it so far. I even jumped ahead to read. I didn't get to finish it, but the Ken Levine interview because there's just so many. Like I said, I'm a huge Bioshock fan, and actually to use that as a transition, you interviewed a lot of game developers for this. It's not just write ups like deep dives on individual games. You also interviewed some of the game developers. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, that's where Bitmap are super handy because they know a lot of people and can put you in touch. But yeah, we really wanted to get, as we said, like you talked about earlier, the kind of behind the scenes, basically. So yeah, we interviewed a whole bunch of people for across the books. So just for example, like in the first book, we interviewed John Romero, so we got his perspective, and then in this book, we interviewed Tim Willits, and we get his perspective, and they are very different about what they think of id software, and stuff like this. Um,
Ah.
and Gary Newman, who did Gary's Mod, and he's talking about the fear that drove him to make this game as good as it could. And I really liked Min Lee, the guy who did Counter Strike, because of you know Counter Strike is massive, and then he just vanished, and you're like, well, what happened? And he was really into it, and I'm amazed at how generous they are with their time. And so Ken Levine is probably the best example of that because I interviewed him for the first book, which has a big interview with him, but we talked for hours, and so I went, well, I'm going to put some of that interview in the second book as well because we had to leave so much of it out. He's a fascinating individual. The way he thinks about his games, and I was asking him, like, do you? if in Bioshock is A true or B true, and he's like, that's not how I develop it. I'm not going to tell you, and I don't know because I want the individual people to answer that for themselves. Basically, there is no correct answer.
I think that's super important. Even if he has something in mind, you like it would ruin the experience for so many people by saying, no, this is definitively how it's supposed to be. Like
Mm.
when you leave ambiguous endings like that, especially with like Bioshock Infinite, man, like that game has like that game goes places. I
Yes.
love Infinite, but like in terms of story, that game goes places you would not expect, and it doesn't really answer a lot of questions. It gives you lots of questions for you to answer based off the information that it presents, which is kind of cool. Like that's kind of like I don't know. I like that. I don't want all storytelling to be like that, but I like it when stories are able to do that. This is a complete tangent, but it's kind of like I've been watching or rewatch, excuse me, 12 Angry Men from like what 1957, and that movie ends with an ambiguous note where like the have you ever watched that movie by any chance?
Maybe a long time ago. I can't remember the ending though.
A very condensed version. It's 12 jurors,
Hmm.
arguing out about this boy who murdered his father, and he's on. If he's convicted, he'll get a death sentence. And the end of the movie, you technically don't know. Like they vote to. I'm not going to spoil, but you don't know if the boy actually did it. That's
Right.
what I'll leave. And but the point of the movie isn't necessarily whether he did do it or did not do it. It was more of a character study of like different biases within the courtrooms and how different personal biases can affect a juror's opinion and stuff like that. And it was made in the 50s specifically, and it was also dealing with racial prejudice and stuff like that, like talking about racial prejudice in the court system. But that's a whole different topic. I promise I won't go into it. But your interview talking about Ken Levine reminded me of that, and man, I would love to chat with him sometime. He seems like a wonderful person.
Yeah, he was cool. And so I say, I was just amazed at how generous people were. I was also amazed at what they would tell you. There are things that I did not put in the books because I was like, well, you've told me that, but I still can't print it because I'll get sued, basically. Um, People are just like, oh, this guy did such and such. I'm like, nope, not writing that down. That's no, you know. But yeah, there were some cool stories about the behind the scenes things, or just where things came from and the ideas that triggered them and stuff. Is yeah, it's nice to be able to hear from the people rather than just kind of guess, basically.
Were there any like interviews that you got that you were like, holy crap, I can't believe I got to interview this person?
I mean, most of them have been, I work in games, so there are all these superstars from a game design nerd point of view. Like Warren Spector talking about Deus Ex was astonishing, and just like yeah, the people that made they did Portals and they did Team Fortress 2s and they did Call of Duties and these sort of things. It's amazing. I like the interview we did with the guys who did Serious Sam. That was fascinating because they were just a bunch of kids basically, and they were trying to make it was their like make or break gamble and stuff like this, and I had no idea what was going on there, sort of thing. So that was cool.
Were there any like when you were doing research for this, were there any games that you were surprised at how influential they were? Like like Halo. Everyone talks about Halo. People know about like Halo is crazy influential for console first person shooters and whatnot. Um, but like, were there any others like whether it was Call of Duty also super influential, Bioshock, Medal of Honor, stuff like that? Were there any games that you were surprised at how influential they were though?
Interesting. I mean, there were a bunch that were ahead of their time, like Sin episodes or the Dino Hunters, which is a pretty weird game, but they were episodic before that existed. And
Hmm.
even Valve tried that with the Half Life episodes, and it was too early. The shops were still running things, and so they didn't want episodic games, basically. And so there were experiments like that. Or there's a game called Quarry, which was you paid money for bullets, basically real money, and you
That's
then
wild.
yeah, and it
That's
was not a very
insane.
no, it was amazing. It didn't do very well. It wasn't apparently a very good game, and it's gone now. But
That is
that
like the proto NFT game right there.
exactly,
You
yeah.
can own the bullets in the game.
Well, you had to buy ammo, and if you got
That's
shot, you
insane.
gave some of your money to that person, and so it was a real winner takes all sort of thing. Um,
Wait, so
yeah,
if you got
and
shot, oh, they took some of your money.
yeah, basically, you gambled an
Okay,
amount, and it went to the people that were shooting the best. That I don't have a problem with. The bit that I didn't like was you bought the bullets, which means if you're in the middle of a match and you run out of bullets, you are very likely to buy more, which is not
that's
a
very
good.
predatory.
Exactly, yeah, that's not a good thing to put a player in, basically. Um, yeah, what else was there? It was interesting what kind of did or didn't like. There was a whole little bit of Vietnam games, and then they just went away. And like you for a while that every game had to have multiplayer, and then eventually they figured out, okay, hang on, let's not worry so much about that. Let's separate them and have single player games, multiplayer games, and even like this week's Doom Dark Ages has no multiplayer. That's people are like, oh, that's strange, but actually, who there aren't that many people who are going to play it. They're all playing, the Fortnites or whatever.
Yeah,
So
now it feels like multiplayer shooters have coalesced into just a handful of games.
yeah, exactly, and that you can see that happening in these books because people are going, "I've made a multiplayer shooter," and you're like, "Yeah, but nobody. Who cares? Nobody. My friends are all playing that multiplayer shooter, so I'm going to go and play that, aren't I? I'm not going to play your game." And you can see the publishers working this out over time, basically. Um, yeah, and
I
then
Oh,
yeah,
sorry, go continue.
well, no, I was going to talk, and then role playing game systems. That was the other thing that I thought was interesting. They start infiltrating first person shooters, basically. That kind of progression mechanics, and there's more than just another level. You have a even if you don't literally have a character, you have a character career sort of thing. That was interesting.
Did you? I didn't get to it, so I apologize if I'm asking a redundant question. But like, Did you talk about Mag in the book?
Yes, yeah, yeah, and then again, they went, well, there's 256 players here. That's going to be our selling point. Whereas it turned out that's not enough, basically. And then we talk about the network hack that took Sony down and therefore started the death of Mag, basically, because it
Was
was offline.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, what were you able to find on that? Because I remember seeing that, and I actually bought. I have a copy of Mag. Not like it's basically it's a bad paperweight because it's just a disc, but it's essentially just a really light paperweight at this point. But I was just wondering, like, what you're able to find out with it because that was so fascinating to me. This idea of a 256 person map, and even from what I remember, like you would have like different ranks, right? Like you could become a general and direct the other players or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, a few games tried that or did that where, like you say, I like that you could say, hey, you kill this. And if they did kill it, they got rewarded for it. So it was actually in everybody's interest, sort of thing. But
Hmm.
yeah, different, what do you call them? Private military companies was the kind of background. And yeah, huge 128 player teams, very hard to organize. And think it started. I'm just trying to flick through the book and find it, but I think it started as a different IP. There was a few that were something, and then they were changed to something else. Yeah, massive action game. It was called.
Ooh, the developer was at the genre. Sorry.
Oh no, that was the title of the game. Mags, massive
Oh.
action game.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But
That game
yeah,
it just fascinated me, man. I really loved. I never got to play much of it, but I thought it was like such a cool idea. Um, so
yeah.
one of the other questions I had for you, just kind of continuing on, is there some place that you can see first person shooters going? Like, do you see, like, I feel like, actually, sorry, that leads me to a question I meant to write down and forgot to, but I just remembered it now. Like, what I was going to say was, like, currently it feels like first person shooters, the big thing now again is like kind of boomer shooters, right? Doom 2016 kind of from my perspective, you could correct me if I'm wrong, like kind of relaunch that style of first person shooter again. It kind of moving away from the gritty, realistic military style to more frenetic and action packed and over the top. And then obviously the Wolfenstein remakes, and there's been Proteus is another really good one. Bolt Gun, Warhammer 40K Bolt
Yeah,
Gun.
yeah.
It feels like the boomer shooters really kind of come back in style. So I was going to ask, like, where do you see game like FPS is going from here? But before I do that, this is kind of a weird question. Do you like the term boomer shooter? Because I've heard mixed opinions on it. I'm just curious, as someone who's a fan of FPSs, do you like the term boomer shooter?
I mean,
I
uh,
know it's not accurate technically, but but
it,
still.
yeah, it kind of, in that way, internet way, it has a kind of derogatory tone to it. But I don't. I mean, I don't use it in the book. In the, I don't want to put something in there that might just be a fad. And the term, I mean,
Hmm.
but it does tell you, like you said, it gives you an immediate impression of how a game will play. Like it will. So modern first-person shooters have an extremely quick time to kill. If I see you, you're dead.
Hmm.
Whereas in, say, Quake, if I see you, we're going to have a duel, and one of us is going to come out on top. So that's a thing that boomer shooters, as it were, you get an immediate idea. And yeah, I tried in each of these books. I tried to end it with, okay, well, what happened next for the genre, and that kind of thing was part of it. Like Dusk, which was, I think, the that for a long time, first person shooters kept trying to replicate reality. They kept trying to get very serious and military. And then a game called Dusk came out and just went, nope. And um, that was part of this re-emergence of, as you say, the boomer shooter. And Ion Fury and Proteus is an amazing example. Yeah, there's loads of them now. What I think is going to be interesting is, like, for gamers of our age, that is what a retro first person shooter looks like. It's kind of quite chunky graphics, very
Hmm.
close to like the PlayStation 1 or whatever. It's like big in big levels, monsters stomping around, you shoot them. But in, say, 10 years, that will not be what an old fashioned first person shooter looks like. It will be more like Half-Life 2 and all these, I don't know, Black and Resistance and all these much more scripted, much higher detail, higher resolution games. That's what retro games will look like. But can you make those as a fan? Like, you can make a Quake style game,
Hmm.
but can you make a Call of Duty on your own? And that's what I think will be interesting when that era becomes retro. Can people
Yeah.
still replicate it in their spare time, basically?
Man, I didn't even think about like when will Call of Duties become indie games essentially?
Yeah, well, exactly. Like, I mean, I think assuming the world doesn't end, AI will help for that for sure. In that people will be able to say, "Help me make something that is currently out of the indie person's scope." There's no way you could do it. It would cost you a fortune. But assuming AI survives, that will be where that comes in, I suspect. But as I say, yeah, the concept of what a retro game is keeps marching on, and it will reach these high detail, high definition, very expensive games at some point.
Oh man, I totally even didn't even think about the AI angle. Now I'm just getting sad.
Yeah,
uh,
it's a whole topic basically.
yeah, I won't. I'll stay off of that. I promise. I
Yeah,
won't. I won't. We're here to talk about. We're having good times talking about first person shooters. We don't need to be bogged down with real life right now. Um. So okay, cool. So you kind of see like realistic FPS is making as kind of like the next future, but almost in like an indie sense, as opposed to a big AAA type of thing. Um,
well, yeah. So, like, it's going to sound weird, but basically, when we were making Nintendo Wii games back in the day, they people had done the research and they could prove that adding more money to your graphics, better graphics, made no difference to sales because that audience did not recognize or care that this graphic was better than this graphic. So it was a waste of time to do it, basically. And I think in the, I'm guessing, but I think in the future that a bit of that's going to come into the games industry, in that just leave the AAA studios to spend $1 billion on Grand Theft Auto. Just relax, basically. Just make fun, cool games. Don't try to replicate reality like a lot of these studios are doing right now. And they're bankrupting themselves. They're betting everything on these, and you're like, oh, that's cool. You've got nice puddles, but so what? Basically, you know what I mean? It's like, so I suspect that will be something that will come where people just get a bit more abstract and a bit more relaxed, maybe.
I just love that. You've got nice puddles. I like that. that got me. Um, no, I'm with you on that, and I think like uh, I don't know. Correct me. I want to know if this is an apocryphal story or not, and it's not. It's it's tangentially tied to your book, but Ken Levine's Irrational Games, when they made Bioshock Infinite, I heard they did not like, even though the game was a critical and commercial success, they still didn't break even. Is that true? Do you know?
I mean, we stopped at Bioshock and Bioshock 2 in the interviews, but that it wouldn't surprise me. Basically, the modern uh, gaming, development, whatever you want to call it, world, you make a deal with a publisher and they put the upfront money in, and they have to recoup their costs, and it's very easy for publishers to make it so that you cannot get past that. Basically, that they spend so much on, say, marketing, that no matter, the game would have to be astonishingly good. And that's not true in all cases. There are amazing publishers, but that kind of predatory thing can happen, and can mean that you can make a game that makes millions and still be considered a failure. And you see it, the big companies, they go, oh, this only sold 6 million copies, we've shut the studio. And you're like, oh my God, that's just because the numbers involved are so ridiculous that. So I don't know in that case, but it would not surprise me for sure.
Okay, okay. I just wasn't sure if it was apocryphal, and I didn't want to if I espouse that in another podcast, I don't want to just be, you know, telling something that's not true.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so, what are some of your personal favorite FPS games that you covered throughout the book? Like, was there anything that like really stood out to you, that whether it's something you grew up with or maybe one you discovered through research?
Yeah, it was very nice to find these hidden gems, as we call them. Like in the first book, there was one called Wrath of Earth, which was a DOS based first person shooter, and
Mm,
it's very low budget. The developer's mum did the voiceover. It's that sort of game.
wow.
Yeah, it's cool. But I really enjoyed the game. It's like you've got this mech suit, and it's charged up by being in the sunlight, but then you have to go underground, and it's dark, and you have to manage your energy, and it's just really creepy. And I was like, I've never heard of this game. It's astonishing. Um, then in the second one, there's a game called Darkest of Days, which
Oh,
is,
I've heard of. Isn't that like a Civil War game?
well, that's the thing. It's a time travel game,
That's
and
what
they
it
built
is.
they built the Civil War bit, and then they ran out of money, and they couldn't get a publisher to fund it, so they released it. And so what you ended up with was a Civil War game, but actually that was only like the first third or half of what they wanted. And so you get the bits where you're setting fire to Roman legionaries with this microwave gun, and but for most of it, it's a Civil War game. But you can see the potential there. There's a whole game just that never quite got a chance to live, sort of thing. There's a game called Azrael's Tear, which I always mention, which I really enjoy. It's like it came out just before 3D cards, and so it runs on your CPU, and it means even today on a modern computer, it still struggles to run this game. It's ridiculous. But it's like a proper puzzle game where there's all these Knights Templar trapped underground, and there are dinosaurs down there, and the Grail won't let anybody die, and you come into it as a sci-fi character, and I just really enjoy the creepiness of it. Like you find a dead body, and then it stands up and starts chatting to you, and the game's like, "Yeah, cool, carry on." Stuff like this. I know it's great. It's just these sort of weird games that yeah. I was going to say they don't make anymore, but they really do make them. You just don't necessarily find them. Uh, yeah. This is what I really enjoyed about the book. Basically, going, I have never heard of this game, and this game is astonishing.
That I think that's one of the biggest selling points I can say for it is just the the amount of research, because it's not just like here's a list of books. I think you even put that in like your introduction where you were trying to avoid a list of books, sorry, a list of games, but you were
Yeah,
trying to avoid just providing a list of games like that. Like you could do that obviously, but like there's a like each game you do a lot of you cover you go into a lot of detail with.
yeah. Well, and I was going to say, that's why when I say this doesn't cover every first-person shooter, that's why, because I was like, I can literally cram them all in, but I would rather do some diving basically to go. Here's a game, and I will talk about it rather than here's a game, here's another game, here's another game. Which that's what I like in my books is to go. I did not know that, and that's why we've left some games out. Basically,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Before I have a few more questions, not necessarily related to the book, but just so my listeners, I always like talking about the author too, not just the book, so my listeners can get to know them a little bit better. And I
Sure.
always find that interesting, at least for personally for me. Like I like to learn about both the book and the author
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah. Go for it.
But before I get to some of those questions, um, for my audience, like what would you say to them as a like what would you why should they buy this book is what I'm saying. What about this book do you think really stands out?
Yeah. So this is where you expose that I'm not like a marketing person. So like, I mean, we put literally years into these books, and so I hope that that passion comes through and that kind of the love for this genre. This is if you thought you played them all, I guarantee you will not have played all these games. And even if you are not super into the first person shooter genre, I've really tried to make it a history of that time in gaming, basically, and use the first person shooter to kind of talk about other topics and technology and violence and the genres coming and going and all these sort of things. So I'm hoping that it is more than just you have to be a first person nut or this book is useless sort of thing. So yeah, maybe that answers the question.
I would say so. I'd say so. Uh, so yeah, I do recommend this book, listeners, and not just because I got a review copy. Like I said, I'm going to be continuing to read this even once I finish the episode, once I finish editing and put this out into the world. Um, I want to kind of change gears though. Something I like to do research on the not just the books that for or not just the whatever like if it's a voice actor, I don't just do research on the game they've voiced. I also like to do research on the person and looking up at some of your game credits. I went on to Moby Games and I was looking up some of your credits, and you worked a lot on Nickelodeon games with
Mm.
SpongeBob SquarePants and also iCarly. I was very surprised to see iCarly on there. So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask because like I feel like specifically games like iCarly, which I have not personally played. I feel I like it's something where the quote unquote capital G gamer might not necessarily look at, but I'm fascinated by a lot of these types of games. I've never taken the time to dive into them, so I want to know what it was kind of like. I mean, it's kind of a very generic question. It's a very open ended one, but like, what was it like developing games for Nickelodeon IPs, whether it was SpongeBob or iCarly or whatnot? Like, what was it like working kind of for Nickelodeon?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of IP based games. Even now, we did Angry Birds, Transformers, and Warhammer Combat Cards. It's still people's IP, and so we have this kind of process we call going full nerd, which is basically you cannot be kind of standoffish with these IP. You cannot be kind of ironic. You have to love them. If you're going to make a game that resonates with that audience, you have to go, as I say, full nerd. And so as a result, you kind of get Stockholm syndrome sort of thing in that I will go to my grave being able to sing the SpongeBob theme tune. And the iCarly one, I wrote the script, and so I flew out. I can technically say I've seen LA, but actually I flew out on a Friday. We spent all weekend recording with the people at the show, and then I flew back on the Monday. So I've seen like a tiny bit of LA. But like from a game design point of view, these games are actually often more interesting to make than when you say do whatever you want. Because when you say do whatever you want, you're like cool. But when you say no, this is a game, like we did like a My Little Pony pitch, and
Hmm.
that's like I don't know 6-year old girls. And he's like, well, I'm not a 6-year-old girl. This is going to be hard work. And from a game design point of view, that's an amazing challenge. How can I deliver what this audience loves? How can I even find out what that is first? And then, yeah, they're made to a budget. They like Blitz Games, who made all these Nickelodeon games. Their thing was these games will come out on time and they will not bankrupt the studio. If the quality isn't there, then they're tough. Basically, that's the thing that will be sacrificed. And so you're trying to do your best in those constraints, but you still, if you look online, every game is somebody's favorite game. You can. Sometimes they're a nightmare. You get these projects where the IP holder doesn't understand how games are made, and that can be really hard work. You have to, try and negotiate those waters. Nickelodeon
Yeah.
weren't a problem in that case. They made so many. They were fine. But yeah, I work with cool people. As I say, I got to know these brands, and you do the best you can. You try to deliver a game for that audience that is as cool as it can be within the constraints that you've got.
Do you find for yourself that like I've said this before to like pretty much almost any creative person I've had on the show, but like that limitations help your creativity, breed creativity? Do you feel like for at least for yourself that those limitations help you become more creative?
Oh yeah, 100%. From a design, yeah, from as a design, like you will, unless you have a time machine, you will never know as a designer if you made the right call. Basically,
Hmm.
you say the game is like this, and it's not like that, and at that point history diverges, and you will never know if you got it right or wrong. So having those constraints really helps you because you can lean into them. You can be like, I'm going to have to make a decision, but based on the fact that I'm working with an IP and an audience and I have all these constraints, I can try to make the best possible decision. Whereas if you say you can do anything, well, that's why you get games that can stall for years because anything is kind of terrifying and hard.
Did you ever end up getting to work on any first person games? I looked on Moby Games. I don't know if that's like a full accurate credit list.
No,
Um,
yeah,
so like,
yeah.
did you actually end up? Because from what I can see, like I don't see one on there, but I wasn't sure if like Moby Games isn't necessarily like the end all be all. So I
No, I
wasn't
mean,
sure. Did you end up getting to work on any first person shooters?
yeah, certainly a lot of game companies don't like using credits, or at least not specific credits, and therefore Moby Games struggles in some places. But the main one I worked on, which was because I've been doing it 28 years. I've released a lot of games, but for every game I've released, at least two more have been canned. I would say it's astonishing. Like
Hmm.
I tried to put these in the books as well, like the FPSs that got canned because it just happens constantly for various reasons. And the one that I regret the most that never came out was a game called Team SAS or Andy McNabb's Team SAS, based on the author Andy McNabb. And it was a first-person shooter. It was 0 to 4 players. It was fascinating. It was on the original Xbox, and it had 4 characters. And if you didn't put a human in it, they would walk through the level and kill everybody. But you could then drop
What?
in and say, "I want to be that player," and the AI would then stay with you. And you could say two of you could say, "Well, I'll take these two," or you could have 4 players. But if you said no players, you would just watch the AI play on its own. And we built these levels by I've never seen it before, and it's really weird. I don't know where we came up with it, but basically, games use these things called splines, which are like curvy lines that things follow, basically.
Okay.
And we put tons of these in the jungle. And the reason, rather than say to the AI, "Go here," what we did was we put a spline in, and it would be all wiggly and very hard to do as a developer. But it meant that you could do ridiculous things that are common now, but were not common 20 years ago. So you could put it and say, when the AI gets to here, put your hand on this piece of stone, or
Okay.
duck under this thing, or step over the thing. And it was astonishing to watch it because you just saw an AI walking around interacting with the world. But actually, we've just done the most time consuming process behind the scenes to get it to do that. And that
Hmm.
game failed when our publisher went bust and we couldn't get another one fast enough. I actually preserved a build of it and I gave it to a website called Games That Weren't, and they've made it public now, which is nice that people can see it.
Oh,
But
that's
that was the
cool.
first person shooter that we worked on for years, and I think it could have been cool. I mean, you never know, but it's the one that I regret that never came out for sure.
I could totally. And when would like what around what time like would it have made it into this book? You know what I'm saying? Was it
Yeah.
between 2003 and 2010?
Well, actually, so I covered it in the first book in the back where we said games that never came out, and I could talk about it because I had insider information of, well, this is why this game never came out.
Hmm.
And for the public, other than seeing it in some magazines and at E3, it just vanished. And so I could use it as an example to say, and this is why it vanished, and this is happening constantly. You just never see it, basically.
Because NDAs are always so strict and everything like that. And
Yeah,
understandably so.
exactly.
You don't want to like if kind of like what Nintendo does where they don't like to share even for games that end up getting like canned, they don't like to share the ideas because you never know if they're going to reuse them later on.
Yeah. And so this case, all the companies involved had long gone bust. So there was no reason not to talk about it. But yeah, often you never hear about these things, or you do 25 years later or whatever.
Hmm. Hmm. Oh man, I you see, it's funny because like I get like reading this book and like getting to talk to you, it just makes me want to play more first person shooters, which is great. But I have so many other games on my plate right now. I'm like, I
Oh, yeah.
can't set aside the time for it. It's a bummer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the modern gaming world, isn't it? Things like Microsoft, the Xbox Game Pass. Here's just thousands of games. You're like, oh my god. Yeah.
I mean, well, I thankfully I don't really have. I don't. Well, I shouldn't say thankfully. I don't have Game Pass mainly just because I don't know why. For some reason, just that idea, just like it just didn't appeal to me. But I'm a game collector, so
Right.
I have so many already to
Yeah.
play. Like I literally am
Yeah.
looking at a shelf of NES games, probably 75% of which I have not touched. So
Nice. Yeah.
I don't need to spend a monthly fee just to look at games that I'm not going to
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
I could do that for free at home.
Yeah,
Um,
I've got this weird thing of one day I'm gonna, I'm hoping I can make enough money that I can retire and then I can just sit and play games. Because people are like, "Oh no, what are you gonna do when you retire?" You're like, "I am not gonna be bored. Thank you very much. I'm gonna be fine."
you're gonna have plenty to keep yourself up, and
Exactly.
that's kind of nice to hear because like sometimes when you're that close to something professionally for so long, by the time you're done, you're like, I don't want to touch it anymore. Like
Yeah.
I've done my time, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with my own games, I don't play them. I never had one I've gone, oh yeah, I'm going to really enjoy that because you just see what was missing or what you failed to deliver in time or
Mm.
what didn't really work. But no, the magic for me is still there with other people's games for sure. Yeah.
So, as a game developer, knowing how the sausage is made, as it were, has not ruined the experience for other games.
It makes it harder to be fully immersed for sure. Like when I love Destiny 2 playing it with my friends, but I can see where they've cut their level up for memory and speed purposes. And my friends don't
Mm.
see that. Or when we play Borderlands, I went, I bet there's a secret up there because that's where I'd put it as a designer. And there was. And so you get that kind of weirdness. But like when you get a really good game, you can still get sucked into it and just forget that sort of thing. Yeah, for sure.
So, one final question for you before I go into my wrap up questions. Um, I asked you before where you think the FPS genre is going to go. To bring it back to your book and to first person shooters in general, where I asked you where you think the FPS genre is going to go. Now I'm going to kind of re ask that, but in a different way. Where would you personally like it to go? Not necessarily about it being a realistic expectation or it's going to happen, but where would you like to see it go?
Hmm. Um, so it's hard to answer with the FPS in specifically, but because as a developer, we have this conversation in the pub quite a lot of like the games industry as it stands, it feels a bit broken, basically.
Hmm.
The big games cost so much money that they close studios if they don't make enough money, and therefore they cannot take any risks. Whereas the little games, we have this problem that the book writing fiction had 10 years ago, which is suddenly anybody can publish a book and you don't need a publisher. And then the question becomes, but should they? And now we've got that kind of thing with indie games where anybody can make a game. It's literally never been easier. Cool, but not all of these games are, not going to say worthwhile, but they can't all be successful. You cannot
Mhm.
possibly keep up with this. So something is going to have to change, and I think the FPS genre is going to be swept up in that sort of thing. So, it, well, assuming this second book does well, the plan will be we're going to wrap this up with a third book in the future, to bring the kind of genre up to now or as close to now as we get. And so I'm not sure what the trends will be because, as I say, there's been this. Each of the books has revealed a story to me, and I'm wondering what that will be for the third one. But whether that split of massive money games and indie games continues, I don't know. The rise, as you say, of the boomer shooters and these suddenly appearing on the market, and then the numbers that they're talking about is nothing to one of these big studios, but is enough for a smaller developer to quite happily keep going.
Mhm.
So I'm glad they've stopped this thing of every game must have a multiplayer mode. That's just, as a developer, that's such a waste of money because you know that that's not going to cut it. I don't think the free-to-play live service model is going to go anywhere because all these games are trying to do is stop being a game and become effectively a hobby.
Yep.
So your
Mhm.
friends are here, this is where you come, and this is where you hang out, and you happen to play, you shoot some aliens, but mostly this is a social thing for you. That isn't going to go anywhere, and there can't be that many of them because if they do their job, you don't play other games, you're sucked into this game.
There is never
So,
going to be another Fortnite at the same level of Fortnite for that exact reason.
yeah, unless they do something spectacularly stupid and the new Fortnite replaces the old one. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Someone buys it and starts calling it X Night, but I'm.
Well, or yeah, exactly. So I think we're going to see these trends of these big hobbies that suck up all your friends, and then these littler things around it that are quirky and weird and don't need to make that much money to be considered a success, and therefore they can play with stuff. That's what I'd like to see.
I like it. I like it. Kind of like a little bit of return of the double A games, as it were.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, true.
Yeah. Well, Stu, I only have a few more questions for you. The way I wrap up all my interviews, I do two different types of questions. One is I ask a question from Alan Alda's 7 questions from his podcast Clear and Vivid. I'm not going to ask all 7 questions; it's a lot, but basically they're like 7 questions about communication. Um,
Cool.
Though one of them I realize it's not on here anymore, but you know what? Just because I always reference it, I've never read what they all are. And the ones I'm going to read are not the ones that I'm going to ask. There's actually an eighth one that I'm going to ask you. But I always like to ask these because I think they're kind of interesting. So he always asks questions to his guests, and they have to answer quickly. But
Okay.
like I said, I'm not going to ask you to answer all 7 of these. But just for my listeners, I always reference them, and I never say what they are. So, what do you wish you really understood? I ask that one a lot. I like that one. What do you wish other people understood about you? What's the strangest question anyone has ever asked you? I should probably do that one more often. Um, how do you stop a compulsive talker? Man, I feel attacked on that one, but okay. Uh, is there anyone you just can't feel empathy for? Oh, that's a heavy one. I'm not going to ask you that. Don't worry. How do you like to deliver bad news? In person, on the phone, then he makes a joke, or by carrier pigeon. I like that one a lot too. And then finally, what, if anything, would make you end a friendship? The whole purpose of his podcast, just for those who don't know, is all about the science of communication. So a lot of these questions, how do you stop a compulsive talker? It's all about dealing with how you communicate to other people. So I find those questions really interesting, and those the answers that you get really interesting. But the question I'm actually going to ask you, because he has asked it a few times on his podcast, though I don't see it on his list here. What book changed your life? That's the actual question I'm going to ask you, Stu. What book
Wow.
changed your life?
Interesting. I mean, yeah, the communication thing in general, as a designer, that's if people. Sorry, I know we're not answering your
No,
question,
by
but
all means, if you want to go into any of them, you're more than welcome. If you want to pick one of the ones that you remember, you can answer
um,
that one
uh,
instead.
like you, I find the subject fascinating because if people say to me as a designer, "What should I learn?" The thing you say is to communicate, because you
Mm-hmm.
can have the best ideas or whatever, but that's irrelevant if you can't get them out of your head into someone else's head. So, soft emotional intelligence, neurolinguistic programming, active listening, these are the whole things that we tell designers to learn. Yeah, I agree that it's a fascinating subject. In terms of the book, though, wow, interesting. I don't know. How can I boil that down? Like, there's a lot of books behind me, and I'm looking at them, going, "Which one of you?" Like, there's a book here that nobody would ever have heard of called The Summer House, which is a kid's book from the 80s, I guess.
Mm.
And that was the first ever book that kind of opened my mind and went, "Oh my god, that like there's these like other worlds or it's basically like a fantasy." But I until that point I'd been reading kids books, and then suddenly this was not like that, and it was and I for a long time I couldn't remember what it was called, and finally tracked a copy down a few years ago and bought it. And the guy only ever wrote this book, it's just
Oh.
super obscure, but
Mm.
it's interesting that even a super obscure book can change one person's life, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. In I don't know.
No, I like. I'm not trying to like that. Can be like I'm not asking for anything like super obscure like
No,
that.
no, no.
Like I mean, it doesn't have to be something well known either. I should say like that is a sufficient answer in and of itself. Like a book that awakened your mind to the idea, like oh, there's like I don't have to write about just things that I know or things that
Yeah,
exist. Like they can be something different, something
exactly. Yeah.
fantastical.
Yeah, and I was pretty young, so therefore, it just was a new concept to me. And sooner or later, one book would do it, but it was this bizarre, obscure little book. Yeah,
That's really cool. That is, I love that. I'm going to also have to start asking, what's the strangest question anyone has ever asked you? I
yeah,
think that I'm going to have to. One of the reasons I don't ask the other ones is they're not necessarily like they can lead into heavier topics that are kind of a bit much for the end of an episode, right? You know, like is there anyone you just can't feel empathy for? That would you
yeah.
start an episode or you do that in the middle of an episode. You don't do that at the beginning or end, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
well, if you're going to do those questions, it's kind of like, I'm going to warn you up front. These are coming so that your brain can start working.
e-
Because,
exactly.
if you want a fast answer, those are hard questions. Like, oh my God. And when you said, what's the strangest question? I would say those are, if somebody
Yeah,
has said
right.
to me, these are the questions, you go, those are the strangest questions that someone's asked me for like a gaming related sort of podcast.
Exactly. And that's why like I like trying to incorporate things outside of gaming related podcast or gaming podcasts into the show, but there are certain things that just will not fit unless I specifically make like a point to do it. But in any case, shout out to Alan Alda and his Clear and Vivid podcast. Really worth checking out. He doesn't know me, you know, he's a big he's an actor, he's a Hollywood star. Well, I guess he's old now. He hasn't I don't know if he's still in the business. I don't know if he's still acting, but he's awesome. I love Alan Alda and worth checking out if you have not listened to it. My final question for you to wrap up this episode is a segment of the show I call Questions from Courtney. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da. Questions from Courtney. Courtney is my wife, and as my listeners know, famously knows nothing about the stuff that I'm into. She's not into video games or geek culture or any of that stuff, though she does encourage it. So I'm always grateful for that. So I always ask her for questions, though, because they're questions that I would never really expect to ask on a gaming podcast. So I asked her this last night, and this is the question she came up with. If you could pick any hobby or skill that you would be able to learn right now, what would it be?
Nice. And just by the side, yeah, my wife is the same. She's mildly into games, but not really. She
Yeah.
like the only time she got sucked in was when I was playing Firewatch, and she would sit there and say, make this
Ooh.
choice or go this way because that the story was so good. That
Shout out to
actually, yeah,
Sissy Jones, man. I had her on the podcast.
nice.
She's the
Yeah,
voice of Delilah.
yeah, it's such a great game. It was just. yeah, it wasn't like other games. And I say my wife.
That's going to be, if you're able to continue on this book series, that's going to be something, the emergence of walking simulators.
Yeah, that would be cool. Actually, I do enjoy those games. My favorite is Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which blows my brain as a designer. I love that game.
I have yet to play it. I will have to give it a shot.
It's not very long, and when you finish it, it will change your perspective on the whole game and make you want to play it again, which is it's brilliant. But yeah, in terms of skill, like it's funny. Say, I've been doing games my whole life. I've written about them, and let's say board game, role playing game. So games, cool. When I was a kid, I was heavily into drawing, and I put that aside, and I've part of me wonders what would happen if I'd have stayed doing that instead. You know what I mean? It's like,
Hmm.
and I can see, you have this thing of what is it, 100,000 hours or something to be an expert or something, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they say that takes like 13 years, and you'll do this many of them in your life. And part of me was like,
Assuming
okay,
you
that
could nail those 100,000 hours like from the get go, I guess is
exactly,
kind of
obviously,
like
yeah.
what the vibe of this question is.
So, but yeah, so I would. I can't spare the time, but that would be a hobby I'd love to get back into, is learning to be able to draw. Basically, yeah,
I like that. I also am jealous of people who have that artistic flair.
yeah,
I always wish I could do it. I'm jealous. My wife is very artistic. She's very crafty and artistic, and she just painting. And I'm always jealous how like she can just be like, "I'm going to try this," and then her first attempt is going to be at least like good.
yeah,
Like her first attempt at something new, it'll be like at least good. I'm like, I don't understand how you can just do that. And it's of course never up to her standards. She wants it to be perfect, but I'm like, for your first attempt, like the journey of a thousand miles begins with a single step or whatever. Like you
yeah,
just took like 500 miles right off the bat, or
yeah.
250 or whatever.
Yeah, I
But
mean, it's definitely true that you can learn a new skill for sure, but some people just seem to start, like you say, they have a head start, basically.
oh, it's nuts. But all right, Stu. Well, that's all the questions I have for you on this episode. Thank you so much again for joining me, man. And once again, shout out to Bitmap Books and Sam, the lead designer. He does a lot of the graphic design. I think he does all the graphic design for Bitmap.
Yeah,
I don't.
basically, yeah, yeah. I just
Um,
give him text, and he makes it look amazing.
oh
So.
man, his design work. I should, what? Since we're reviewing the book, I should at least say, at the end of the episode, because I'm a professional and I know what I'm doing. The graphic design and like the presentation is just stunning in this book. Like I really, really loved getting to look through it, and it's like the screenshot pics were great. I should have asked that. You know what? One final question: did you have any say in like what screenshots were chosen, or did Sam do all of that?
No, I did like 90% of the screenshots.
Okay, okay.
And then Sam has a guy that can help with the super hard ones to emulate or whatever.
Hmm.
But most of them is me. That's the Yeah. So you kind of write about the book, and then you've got sorry, you write about the game, and then you've got to take the screenshots. And ironically, sometimes that's the hardest bit, where you get, like, if you're going to run an old DOS game, easy, because DOSBox. If you're going to run a modern game, easy. But there was a bit in between where games were half DOS and half Windows 95, and they were a
Hmm.
nightmare to get screenshots out of, because computers nowadays just don't understand them. They like, what
Yeah.
is this?
it
Yeah,
it's not a first person shooter, but I can relate to that. Where like, what is it? I'm a there's Muppet Treasure Island has a PC game from like the late 90s or whatever, and it's like impossible to find how to run until someone was able to do their own like mod of it. Essentially,
yeah,
like you have to get
exactly.
enthusiasts to essentially either find the source code or reverse engineer it. To get it around to work on those things. So I can understand that how difficult that would be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of games which the installer works in DOS, but the game runs in Windows. So you can't run it in DOSBox and you can't run it in Windows.
Oh
And so,
no,
like you say, you need the fans, or you need Sam's screenshot guy who solves these problems for me, basically.
that's crazy. Yeah, I probably should have brought it up when we were talking about the book in earnest, but like it is genuinely a beautiful looking book. Like the a lot of times, like I don't say this to denigrate the other books that I've gotten review copies, but they're like paperback books, and like they are just they're books. They look good. They're functioning they're the way they're supposed to, but like this is just like it's another level of just graphic design and like artistry that's put on display for it. Like I really loved how it looks. So shout out to Sam and everyone over at Bitmap Books for the review copy and for the fantastic graphic design and layout design and all that stuff.
Yeah, cool.
um,
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on. They've been cool. I say you ask interesting questions, which is nice. It's good.
Thank you. I try to I do my best coming up with questions. I try to get a couple softballs in there, but then I also try to come up with ones that might be a little bit different. So thank you. I appreciate that. So for my listeners, Stu, where can the good people find you online? What else? What would you like to promote? Obviously, Hurt Me Plenty, the history of first person shooters from 2003 to 2010, or just Hurt Me Plenty for short. But from Bitmap Books. But is there anything else that you would like to promote besides that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky. Just search, Stuart Maine. Yeah, and then say I've got this designing video games book, which is it's not like these games, not a history book. It's trying to give some advice to people that are just starting out.
Mm-hmm.
You can find that on Amazon and whatnot. But no, other than that, these, and then we're working on a unannounced next book with Bitmap, so that's cool. That'll be in a couple of years, hopefully. So just keep going.
All right. As usual for myself, listeners, you can follow me on Blue Sky, mainly at stillloadingpodcast.com over there. You can also follow me on Instagram at stillloadingpod, Facebook at stillloadingpod. Though I'm not really on Facebook just gets automatically uploaded every time I put a picture on Instagram. So it's like I'm there, but I'm not there. So you can follow me on all those locations. I'm also over on Twitch at Still Loading Pod, where I stream at random times whenever I freaking feel like it. So you never really know, but I can guarantee you I'm most Tuesday nights around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm over with my buddy Andrew over at the Experience Point at the EXP Point on Twitch, and we do a little mini talk show called Talk Tuesdays, where we just talk about the things we have experienced throughout the week, whether it's media, whether it's my basement fucking flooding for like 7 times, all over, all different types of topics. So you can find me at those locations. If you like this podcast and you want to support it and you want to support me, it would really mean the world to me. And the easiest way for you to do that, and it's completely free, is just to give it a 5-star rating or review on whichever podcasting app you use, because it does help more people find the show. It pleases the algorithm gods, and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. And I like feeling warm and fuzzy. You can also support the show monetarily if you really like it. I got a lot of bonus content over at patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For only $1 a month, you get all the episodes earlier with better audio quality, as well as access to patron voting rights, which I do quarterly polls, and then I do a bunch of polls at the beginning of each year for various different things. So you can help guide the direction of the show over there for only $1 a month. For $3 a month, you get everything at the $1 tier plus patron shoutouts, which you heard at the beginning of this episode. For $4 a month, you get all of that, the previous 2 tiers, plus 2 mini bonus episodes, which I think at the time of this is coming out is like I'm well over 80 bonus episodes, like mini, like 15 to 20-minute bonus episodes that come out twice a month. So there's over 80 of them. That's all at the $4 tier. And finally, there is a $5 tier where you get everything, all the stuff at the previous tiers, plus access to my monthly movie podcast, which right now is called Still Family, my monthly Fast and Furious movie podcast, where all the guests who join me aren't just friends, they're family. So if any of that interests you, I have all that over at patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But yeah, that's it. That is all the time I have for you on this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for joining me. Stu, thank you for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great. I enjoyed it.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.